determine that you were going to have an adventure. Like, I'm going to arrange a nice little adventure for 7 and invite my friends, and that you could have people come with you. And as I became an educator, I thought, man, wouldn't it be great if every day, instead of lesson planning, I could arrange adventures for my students to come along. And so as the story goes, eventually Bilbo says yes, and he goes on this adventure. He goes out, he gets his walking stick, he meets a golem, he gets a ring, he fights a dragon, he gets some gold, he goes home, and he lives happily ever after. Sorry, spoiler alert, that's The Hobbit. So, great, that's the story of The Hobbit, but with that being said, there's a lot more to it than a lot of us want to retell. For example, in that first scene, when Gandalf the Grey knocks on Bilbo Baggins' door and says, I'm looking for someone to share an adventure that I'm arranging, he follows up with, it's very difficult to find anyone. And what's more is Bilbo responds, I should think so. He tells them that we're plain people, we don't like going on adventures, they're nasty, uncomfortable things, and that they make you late for dinner. And as I read this, it really occurred to me that this is so analogous to my life as a coach, as a school leader. And I think about, if I truly want to invite my colleagues and my students on adventures, how often do they say this back to me? I've literally told teachers when I'm like, let's stay after and talk about Google. They're like, no, it's going to make me late for dinner. Go away. And so I want to think a little bit about our teachers. And specifically going back to this analogy, in the book The Hobbit, J.R.R. Tolkien describes hobbits as not the adventuring type. Bilbo Baggins says that to Gandalf the Grey. I'm not the adventuring type. Now, yesterday, Jeff Duncan Andrade talked to us about a concept that Claude Steele popularized in his book, Whistling Vivaldi, which, by the way, I have to +1 that recommendation. It's amazing. Read it. But he talks about stereotype threat and the self-identity that many of our students have, where they believe the stereotypes the society has given to them, and then that then becomes a psychological, and sometimes in his book he proves physiological barrier to achieve and to be successful. But I posit to you that that happens to our teachers as well. There's stereotype threat that our teachers face in their own self-identity of what they can accomplish. And as coaches and principals, it's our role to help them overcome that stereotype threat. Now, Bilbo Baggins said, I'm not the adventuring type. But Gandalf the Grey, his coach, was able to help him overcome that stereotype threat and see a new self-identity for himself so that he could go on to fight golems, get rings, get riches, go home, fight dragons. And this reminds me of a really amazing TED Talk by a Nigerian author named Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Has anyone seen this before? Oh, it's so great. So what I'd like for all of you to do is I'm just going to get off and take the next 18 minutes to watch this. I'll be right back. JK. So in this talk, Chimamanda talks about something called the single story. The single story is what she says is the single story that is told about a certain group of people over and over again until it becomes all anyone knows about them. As a Nigerian middle-class woman, she encountered the single story of Africa when she came to the United States for university and realized that people had one understanding of her society and her culture and this continent as one giant country that's a village of barefoot children. She said, this is crazy. This is the single story. And she goes on to say something about stereotypes. She says, stereotypes aren't wrong. They're just incomplete. And as educators, I started to think about that, and I said, what are the single stories and the stereotypes that are then propagating the stereotype threat in our organizations and in our industry? So today I want to look at the single stories that we have about ourselves as teachers, as coaches, as principals, the single stories that we have about each other and our peers, and consider the untold stories that we need to be considering as we go in to support our colleagues in transforming our communities. So I have 3 stories for you today that we're going to talk through. The first one is the single story of our resistant colleagues and the untold story of friendly dragons. Now, when I first became a coach, I was resistant. I was